Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. The U.S. and China are holding another round of high-stakes trade negotiations. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the TikTok issue is almost resolved. Trade Chief Jamieson Greer hints that another tariff pause on China is possible.
Current pause is set to expire November 10th. We're certainly open to considering further action there if the talks continue in a positive direction.
Countries all around the world are holding memorials for assassinated U.S. conservative thought leader Charlie Kirk. In South Korea, demonstrators also echoed his warning against communist China's influence.
He seems to understand that the CCP is interfering in South Korea.
A Chinese tech company executive charged for allegedly defrauding American investors over $100 million. What we know about the alleged scheme. A former FBI official under fire. He's accused of leaking inside information that helped a Chinese energy giant escape charges. What you need to know from the DOJ report. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer met with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng in Madrid on Monday. Officials say the negotiations' key sticking points are Beijing's weaponization of rare earth minerals and China's fentanyl-related activities, including money laundering. They signal a TikTok ban is still on the table if an agreement isn't reached.
President Trump says trade negotiations with China in Spain have gone very well and will be concluding shortly. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the TikTok issue is almost resolved and there will be either a deal or a ban.
Our Chinese counterparts have come with very aggressive asks. We will see if we can get there. At present, we are not willing to sacrifice our national security for a social media app.
President Trump set a September 17th deadline for TikTok's parent company to sell the platform to an American company.
We may let it die, or we may, I don't know, it depends, up to China.
Trump will speak to Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping on Friday. Bessent says the framework for a TikTok deal has been reached. The two leaders will finalize the agreement that day. He adds that even if there's no deal on TikTok, it won't affect the relationship between the two countries.
There are a range of other asks that are unresolved.
Among those unresolved issues is Beijing's support for Russia's war in Ukraine. Last week, President Trump wrote a letter to NATO allies about placing punitive tariffs on China, Russia's #1 ally in the war. He said, quote, "I am ready to do major sanctions on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed, and when all NATO nations stop buying oil from Russia." Plus, NATO as a group placing 50% to 100% tariffs on China. China has a strong control and even grip over Russia, and these powerful tariffs will break that grip. He urged NATO members to align with the U.S. in order to stop the war. According to the Wall Street Journal, Xi is pushing Trump to visit China in October. The U.S. reportedly wants the meeting to take place in South Korea during the APEC summit, scheduled for late October to early November. The U.S. also continues to pressure China to stop weaponizing its control of rare earths. Beijing controls about 70% of global rare earth production.
Right now we have a 90-day pause in effect with respect to U.S. tariffs on China and Chinese severe controls on rare earth minerals. We have been renewing that pause periodically. The current pause is set to expire November 10th. We're certainly open to considering further action there if the talks continue in a positive direction.
India is another major buyer of sanctioned Russian oil. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently visited China and was photographed with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. President Trump expressed his dissatisfaction with the meeting, but later reaffirmed his friendship with Modi. New trade talks between the U.S. and India will restart on Tuesday. The Assistant U.S. Trade Representative Brendan Lynch leads the U.S. delegation. President Trump has reportedly urged European allies to join the U.S. in imposing 100% tariffs on China and India. He's aiming to pressure Russia to end its war in Ukraine. The U.S. has already imposed 50% tariffs on imports from India. That includes a 25% tariff for India's purchases of Russian oil. Experts aren't confident there will be a breakthrough on a U.S.-India deal, but they say restarting negotiations is a positive step. U.S. chip giant Nvidia got hit with some unpleasant news. China's market regulator today said the company violated the country's anti-monopoly law based on a preliminary probe.
Shares of the company were trading down around 2% in the pre-market. China opened an investigation into Nvidia last year over its acquiring Mellanox, an Israeli technology company. The company creates network solutions for data centers and servers. China's market regulator says Nvidia violated China's anti-monopoly laws through the 2020 acquisition and its conditions. It didn't provide specific details. Nvidia last month struck a deal permitting renewed chip sales after their suspension. The terms of the deal stipulate that 15% of related revenue must go to the U.S. government.
And earlier, Nvidia responded with a statement saying, quote, "We comply with the law in all respects. We will continue to cooperate with all relevant government agencies as they evaluate the impact of export controls on competition in the commercial markets." Vigils and parades in memory of U.S. conservative thought leader Charlie Kirk are taking place in many countries over the past few days. Many of the slogans seen in these parades echo the messages once promoted by Kirk, including those against Communist China's influences. On Saturday, hundreds of South Korean citizens took to the streets of their capital, marching with U.S. and South Korean flags to honor Charlie Kirk. They were heard chanting, "We're Charlie Kirk," with banners printed displaying the same message. And on the other side of the banners, it said that visa-free entry for Chinese people equates to security threats for the country. In other parades, there are China-related banners written in Chinese, saying, quote, "Heaven will destroy the Chinese Communist Party." Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, was assassinated during his college tour campaign in Utah last week, only days after he visited South Korea and Japan. Morris Tan, the former U.S. ambassador at large for global criminal justice and dean of Liberty University School of Law, sheds light on what impacts Kirk had left on these Asian countries.
He seems to understand that the CCP is interfering in South Korea, is trying to do a lot of similar things to the sorts of things that they do in other places where they try to flood a place with the CCP people. And that is in the process of happening.
Events commemorating Charlie Kirk have emerged across the United States. Outside the U.S., people in countries such as the UK, Australia, Germany, Canada, and Spain held their own memorial events. Many expressed support for the values and rights he stood for. However, one country stands in stark contrast: China, under the Chinese Communist Party. Beijing's mouthpiece, People's Daily, as well as its state-run news agency Xinhua and other state-run media, are spreading narratives highlighting violence and division within the U.S. Last week, Utah Governor Spencer Cox warned that Russia and China were spreading bot-generated disinformation to instill division in the U.S. A Chinese tech company executive was charged last Friday for allegedly defrauding American investors of $100 million. His name is Lai Hui-shen, co-CEO of a Chinese tech firm called OST. The Justice Department indicted Sen and Yan Zhao, financial advisor of the company. It sells parts for consumer electronics and is traded on the NASDAQ.
U.S. authorities say the two men inflated the company's stock prices and then dumped them. Investors suffered heavy losses when the company lost more than 90% of its market value this June. The DOJ has seized over $10 million worth in assets from co-conspirators' accounts. The Chinese company at one point operated with an investment structure called VIE. This allows Chinese companies to list on U.S. stock markets by setting up shell companies in offshore locations like the Cayman Islands. President Trump has asked officials to review this investment structure used by foreign adversary companies. His directive says this investment structure limits protections for American investors. Roughly 160 Chinese companies have gone public on U.S. stock exchanges through the VIE structure.
Former FBI senior official Charles McGonigal exposed the Bureau's investigation into a now disbanded Chinese company. It's called the China Energy Fund Committee, or CEFC. McGonigal tipped off people under investigation, resulting in one target avoiding arrest. He stayed in touch with them for years, leaking non-public details from inside the FBI. That's according to a Justice Department report released this month. The Bureau didn't mention any names. Back in 2018, one of the company's top executives, Patrick Ho, was sentenced to 3 years in prison in the U.S. He was a member of one of China's highest political organizations. He was convicted in a bribery scheme. Ho was confirmed to be one of the people McGonigal advised not to travel to the U.S., believing he would be arrested. The full scope of McGonigal's leaks is still unknown. That case resurfaced years ago when court records showed Hunter Biden, son of Joe Biden, received millions from CEFC while it was under corruption investigations. The Chinese Communist regime's long arm on American soil has raised serious concerns for one Pennsylvania state senator. Doug Mastriano, who ran for governor in 2022, spoke with NTD this past weekend.
In an interview with NTD on Saturday, Pennsylvania's State Senator Doug Mastriano underscored that the CCP's human rights abuses are not confined to China's borders.
At the first level, in China itself here, we watch them with a very repressive attitude towards the Christians, Falun Gong, and other groups, Muslims out west. And that's a result of a communist system. The communist system is you worship the government and not God. Now we see in a second level where communist China is oppressing people outside of their country. That's a big problem. If there is covert agencies acting as legal agencies or secret police or what have you, they need to be removed immediately from my country.
Mastriano mentioned the need to stop illicit drugs coming in from China and prevent the Chinese regime from carrying out espionage operations in the U.S.
We have to be real careful about who we allow in the country. I know we allow many students in our country. We need to make sure that those coming in aren't conducting espionage, stealing secrets, we saw that, and secondly, they're not working for the communist government here and exporting ideas to influence our country.
On September 30th, Philadelphia plans to raise the Communist Chinese flag in front of City Hall to mark the founding of the communist regime. Mastriano calls it a terrible idea, saying the flag is offensive to Chinese Americans who fled the communist system to pursue freedom in America.
Let's stop being politically correct here and say no to raising a flag over our city here that oppresses people, throws Christians in jails, takes out organs of people in prison, persecutes minorities, and it needs to stop.
The state senator says lawmakers can issue resolutions or pass bills to prohibit communist activities in Pennsylvania. Mastriano's interview came as he celebrates faith at Magnolia Women's Center in Philadelphia. The senator recently voted yes to pass Senate Resolution 131, which designates September 12th as Day of the Bible in Pennsylvania.
Coming up, the U.S. is deploying its Typhon missile system to Japan for the first time. The weapons are capable of striking targets in China's eastern seaboard. Details on how long it would stay.
Through employing multiple systems and different types of munitions, it is able to create dilemmas for the enemy.
A Taiwanese minister visiting Washington warns that the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions go far beyond Taiwan. And new U.S. tariffs on Japanese imports are set to take effect Tuesday. Japan is a key U.S. ally in Asia in countering communist China. How does this fit into the broader picture of U.S.-China competition? That and more in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The U.S. is bringing its Typhon intermediate-range missile system to Japan for the first time. From there, the weapon system is capable of firing missiles that can strike eastern China's seaboard and parts of Russia.
Through employing multiple systems and different types of munitions, it is able to create dilemmas for the enemy.
The missile system was sent to Japan to take part in an annual joint drill. It would leave after the drill wraps up. Typhon can also fire missiles that can strike ships or aircraft more than 125 miles away. Washington is aiming to deploy these weapons across Asia to counter Beijing's military aggression. Meanwhile, Japan is in the middle of its biggest military expansion since World War II. The country has stepped up its military spending, buying missiles for warships and developing its own intermediate range missiles. Taiwan is also set to boost its defense spending to more than 3% of its GDP next year, under pressure from Washington. The Chinese Communist Party has been threatening to take Taiwan despite never having ruled it. China is stepping up military incursions near Taiwan. Last week, Taiwan's minister in charge of China affairs visited Washington. He warned that Beijing's ambitions go far beyond Taiwan.
Last week, Chu Chui-jen, Taiwan's cabinet level head of the Mainland Affairs Council, visited Washington and delivered a speech at the Heritage Foundation. He warned that the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions reach far beyond Taiwan.
In seeking unification with Taiwan, the CCP seeks to exclude the U.S. influence from the Asia-Pacific region, ultimately replace the United States as a global leader in order to restore the national glory and realize the so-called China dream.
Chu said Beijing is trying to create a new normal by increasing threats to Taiwan. In 2024, more than 5,000 Chinese military aircraft conducted operations around the island, with 3,000 crossing the Taiwan Straits median line. From January through July this year, Taiwan recorded over 3,000 Chinese fighter jet incursions.
If Taiwan were to be taken over by China by force, it will trigger a domino effect, undermine the regional balance power, and direct threat the security and the prosperity of the United States.
Reporting from Taiwan, Joy Chu, NTD News.
President Trump said last month that he would meet with China's Xi Jinping before the end of the year if a trade deal is finalized. Chu said Taiwan welcomes U.S.-China dialogue, believing such exchanges can maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. When the U.S. and China are engaged in trade negotiations, another major trade deal between the U.S. and a key Asian country is quietly nearing its effective date. Japan finalized a trade deal with the U.S. earlier this month. It's set to take effect on Tuesday. Tariffs on Japanese imports will now match European levels, while Japan commits to buying more American planes, defense equipment, and even rice. To break it down, we spoke with Riley Walters, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, for more. Riley Walters, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Japan is saying the U.S. levies from the recent trade talks are set to kick in on September 16th. That's after the trade deal where it was lowered from the initial 25% to a baseline of 15%. First, what do you make of that 15% baseline? What does that mean in terms of these two economies?
Well, the 15% is on par with what the European Union is getting, and I think that's really what the Japanese have been striving to achieve, which is on par with many of our United States' other large trading partners. The key thing here is that these tariffs are not in addition to anything. If you consider it, especially with relations to other countries in Asia, which are getting additional, let's say, 19%. Or 20%, it's really quite advantageous for Japan. And so even though these tariffs are quite higher than what we've historically seen, they are relatively lower than some of Japan's competitors in the region for trade with the United States.
And zooming out a bit here, because of course the U.S. and Japan now have a very strong defense or security relationship. This comes amid growing aggression and belligerence from the Chinese regime and also North Korea in that area. But in terms of trade, of course, the U.S. and China are still working on their trade deal, right? There's been several rounds of talks and no final deal yet. There's certain iterations of it. So how does this U.S.-Japan relationship and trade deal fit into the broader picture of U.S.-China competition?
It's quite difficult, I would say, actually. Trade in itself has been both operating in its own special basket as this administration has looked to increase foreign investment in the United States or build up these protectionist measures for domestic producers in the United States. But tariffs have also been used by this administration for a myriad of issues. whether it's political, whether it's strategic, whether it's trade. And so it can be quite confusing. I think for sure this administration and many in the United States would like to see greater partnership with Japan and its allies and partners on economic issues, on defense issues, in order to start, removing China from their supply chains. And so whether these tariffs can actually achieve that or not, I don't quite know at this point. But I think the discussions that they are having will start to focus more on this competition with China question. We've already seen rumors of this administration asking the European Union to levy tariffs on imports from China and India. Will this administration go to Japan and South Korea and others next to ask them to do the same thing as, of course, the United States imposes its own tariffs on imports from China, which may funnel through other countries as well. Transshipment was a big topic for many trade negotiations as well.
I mean, to your point, there is a lot of uncertainty everywhere, right? The other countries, their governments, global markets, manufacturers themselves trying to be like, oh, should I be pulling my business out of China? Should I not? Wait, tariffs seem even higher in some of these other friendlier nations. What should I do? In terms of the American consumer, though, of course, we're waiting for our own potential Fed rate cuts here at home. But what should, say, the average Joe on the street be watching in terms of all these global trade deals? How will that impact, say, our pocketbooks?
It's hard. It's hard to really see the aggregate effect or the immediate effect on your pocketbook. I think the more immediate cost to the U.S. economy could come to employment, those kinds of issues, where you have small, medium companies that typically import from abroad, not being able to afford those goods as readily anymore. And so instead of perhaps passing on the cost to consumers, where they might end up losing business, maybe they let 1 or 2 employees go. And that way they can stay cost competitive. They can afford the higher input costs from the tariffs that they're paying. And of course, make sure that people are getting the goods that they're producing. The inflation aspect of all of this, which I think many have tried to focus on over the last several months, it's quite confusing because when we generally talk about inflation, we're generally talking about it in the aggregate. But when we're talking about trade and the import of goods, we're importing tens of thousands of unique items at different price points that have very different demand signals. And so it's we try and aggregate all of this to make it seem more simple, but it's quite not simple.
Riley Walters, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round the clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.